There is a quiet truth about Thanksgiving that no one speaks aloud. Families gather to feel safe, but the walls of a home hold memories much older than the people inside it. On this particular night, in a house that stood at the edge of a sleeping neighborhood, the warmth of the holiday meal mixed with the silence that felt far too heavy. Candles flickered across the long dining table, their flames bending as if reacting to something that moved through the room without sound. The roasted turkey sat untouched at the center, its skin reflecting the soft light in uneven patches, almost like breaths shifting beneath the surface. The family had gathered for dinner only moments earlier, laughing in the dim glow and clinking glasses with the comfort of tradition. But that comfort ended when a strange ripple passed through the chandelier, a tremor so subtle that no one reacted at first. Then the second tremor came, slower, almost deliberate, and the laughter stopped. Someone whispered that it may have been the furnace, but the air held no warmth. Someone else said it may have been wind, but the curtains did not move. The room grew cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather, and for a moment, no one knew what to say. They listened. They waited. And the house answered with a low creaking sound, one that traveled across the ceiling in a straight line, as if something walked directly above them. The steps were too spaced to match human stride, too slow to match any animal. A long silence followed, one so thick that breathing felt wrong inside it. The family exchanged uneasy glances, each one silently hoping another person would offer an explanation. But explanations require logic, and nothing about the sound felt logical. Before anyone could speak, the overhead light dimmed just slightly, the shadows stretching across the walls as if pulled by invisible hands. A child at the table asked a question that silenced everyone completely. Who is upstairs? No one lived on the second floor. No footsteps should have been there. No presence should have moved through that part of the house. Yet the steps continued. Slow, measured, heavy in the way that weight feels when it belongs to something that does not follow the rules of a human body. One of the adults stood from the table, trying to appear calm as he reached for the hallway light, but the switch refused to respond. The light above flickered again, brighter, then dimmer, as if something breathed through the wires. The family remained seated, frozen by a fear they could not yet name, staring at the ceiling as the steps stopped directly above the dining table. The sound of those steps did not fade. They simply ended, not like a person walking away, but like something choosing to stop moving. The silence that followed felt alive. It pressed down on the room with a slow, suffocating heaviness, a presence that seemed to watch from the unseen space above. The turkey on the table began to cool, its steam fading into the air like a final breath. The candles flickered again and again, each flame bowing toward the same corner of the room, as if responding to something that stood there just beyond human sight. Someone whispered that they should leave the house, but the words died in the air. No one wanted to move. No one wanted to draw attention. The child at the table looked toward the staircase, eyes wide, lips trembling, and asked in a quiet voice that trembled like a fractured note, "Why is it coming closer?" They did not know how the child sensed movement before it happened. They did not know why the air grew colder with each passing second. But they did know that whatever walked across their ceiling had stopped listening to walls, floors, or boundaries. Something had entered their Thanksgiving night without being invited, without being welcomed, without belonging to the world they understood. And the question that would haunt them forever was the one they did not dare speak aloud in that moment, the one that hung in the dark like a truth struggling to take shape. Long before that Thanksgiving night fractured the family's sense of safety, the house had already carried an unspoken weight that no one fully understood. It stood at the far edge of a quiet neighborhood where the forest began to thicken, its tall trees forming a wall that blocked most of the late afternoon light. The home had belonged to the family for years, passed down through generations that rarely spoke of its history in full. They called it a traditional gathering place, a point of return, a place where memories should have felt warm and familiar. But even during childhood visits, there had always been something unusual about the house's silence. It did not feel like the calm stillness common in older homes. It felt watchful, as if the very walls listened more closely than they should. The family ignored that feeling, pushing it aside whenever holidays brought them together. They would set the table, light candles, and laugh through stories that had been told too many times, hoping that the warmth they created inside the dining room could drown out the subtle cold hiding in the corners. The land around the house held its own stories, ones that older residents of the town shared only when the younger generation insisted on knowing why certain areas felt heavier than others. They spoke of strange sounds heard during late November nights, sounds that were not voices, but carried the suggestion of breath. They spoke of an incident many years earlier when a hunter claimed he saw someone standing among the trees wearing clothes that did not belong to any era he recognized. He approached, calling out, but the figure did not turn, did not flinch, did not acknowledge him in any way. It simply dissolved into the shadow between the branches, leaving the hunter shaken and certain that what he had seen had not been entirely human. The family dismissed these stories as local folklore meant to entertain or unsettle, but even they could not ignore the way the house reacted to certain nights of the year. Thanksgiving had always been one of them. It was common for lights to flicker without reason, or for the upstairs hallway to groan at odd hours as if pressured by weight that left no footprints behind. Some relatives joked that the house disliked gatherings and preferred to remain empty. Others lowered their voices when discussing it, remembering whispers heard from rooms with closed doors or sudden chills passing through hallways untouched by drafts. This history was never enough to stop them from returning, because tradition holds power, and families cling to familiarity even when something beneath that familiarity feels fragile. But as that particular Thanksgiving approached, the atmosphere around the home shifted more noticeably. The air seemed colder even during daylight. Birds avoided the trees closest to the house, circling wide before landing deeper in the forest. A family member mentioned hearing soft thumps late at night, as if something moved across the yard with a weight too significant to be an animal. Another said they saw a shape near the fence one evening, tall and motionless, blending into the fading light with an unnatural precision. They told themselves that tiredness could distort perception, that shadows always played tricks when the sun dipped behind the trees, yet each person entered the house on Thanksgiving Day with a quiet unease they chose not to voice. Inside, the house carried a stillness that felt older than any memory. The floorboards seemed to breathe under every step, expanding and contracting like the slow pulse of something waiting. The family arranged the table, lit candles, and laughed through stories that have been told too many times, hoping that the warmth they created inside the dining room could drown out the subtle cold hiding in the corners. The land around the house held its own stories, ones that older residents of the town shared only when the younger generation insisted on knowing why certain areas felt heavier than others. They spoke of strange sounds heard during late November nights, sounds that were not voices but carried the suggestion of breath. They spoke of an incident many years earlier when a hunter claimed he saw someone standing among the trees wearing clothes that did not belong to any era he recognized. He approached, calling out, But the figure did not turn, did not flinch, did not acknowledge him in any way. It simply dissolved into the shadow between the branches, leaving the hunter shaken and certain that what he had seen had not been entirely human. The family dismissed these stories as local folklore meant to entertain or unsettle, but even they could not ignore the way the house reacted to certain nights of the year. Thanksgiving had always been one of them. It was common for lights to flicker without reason, or for the upstairs hallway to groan at odd hours as if pressured by weight that left no footprints behind. Some relatives joked that the house disliked gatherings and preferred to remain empty. Others lowered their voices when discussing it, remembering whispers heard from rooms with closed doors or sudden chills passing through hallways.
In the hours leading up to that terrifying moment at the dining table, the Thanksgiving gathering unfolded with a kind of fragile normalcy that hides cracks beneath its surface. The family moved through the day as if following a script they had memorized years ago, each person performing familiar tasks without truly seeing the others. Someone chopped vegetables in the kitchen while glancing nervously toward the window, unsure why the trees outside seemed to stand too still. Someone else prepared the gravy, pausing several times because they felt vibrations through the floor that did not match any appliance running in the house. A child wandered through the upstairs hallway earlier in the afternoon, claiming to hear tapping behind the walls, slow taps that followed their steps as if something inside the structure matched to their movements. The adults dismissed the child gently, telling them old wood always groaned in cold weather, but even as they reassured the child, their own skin prickled with unease. The house seemed to absorb every sound, every breath, every movement, creating a strange vacuum of silence between rooms. When someone opened a cabinet or shut a drawer, the echo lasted too long, stretching through the house with a strange elasticity that felt unnatural. When someone walked across the living room, the floorboards creaked not beneath their feet but slightly behind them, as if something delayed its reaction. These small disturbances felt insignificant when isolated, but taken together, they created a quiet tension that moved through the home like a slow ripple. As afternoon turned to evening, the light outside shifted into an orange glow that filtered through the windows in strange, fractured patterns. It looked almost as if the glass had become thicker, distorting the shapes of trees and shadows. A family member stepped onto the back porch to smoke, and they felt the immediate sense that the air outside had changed. It carried a weight that pressed against the chest, not uncomfortable, but unmistakable. They noticed something else. There were no sounds. No rustle of leaves, no birds retreating into the branches, no distant cars on the old county road. The world outside had muted itself. They stared at the tree line, certain they detected a shape standing between the trunks, tall and still, with edges too sharp to be a shadow. They blinked, and the shape blended into darkness, as if it had stepped backwards without moving. They went inside, closing the door slowly, and said nothing. As dinner preparations continued, the temperature inside the home dropped without explanation. The thermostat remained unchanged, yet a thin chill spread through the hallways, slipping under doorways like a presence that did not need permission. Someone placed extra logs in the fireplace, yet the flames burned weakly, their light flickering in a way that suggested interference rather than draft. The smell of roasting turkey filled the kitchen, but there was a faint undertone beneath it, something metallic, almost sharp, as if the air carried a scent that did not belong to food or smoke. The family tried to ignore it, telling themselves that old houses always held strange smells, especially during colder months, but a shared discomfort moved between them, unspoken and heavy. As they set the dining table, the youngest child wandered toward the staircase and stopped at the bottom step. They stared upward with a stillness that made the adults uneasy, their small shoulders stiff, their eyes locked on the dark space at the top landing. One of the adults asked what they saw, but the child only shook their head slowly. When urged again, the child whispered that someone stood there, halfway hidden, watching them. The adults exchanged tense glances, but when they looked, the staircase appeared empty. The child insisted that the shape had stepped out of view the moment they spoke. This was dismissed as imagination, but the child refused to go upstairs afterwards, clinging to a chair with trembling fingers. In the hour before they sat at the table, the house began to behave strangely enough that no one could ignore it any longer. A cupboard door opened on its own, with a slow, measured movement, as if guided by an unseen hand. A glass slid across the counter without falling, moving several inches before stopping abruptly. A sudden thump echoed from the attic, powerful enough to shake dust down through the ceiling vent. Someone ran their hand along the wall in the hallway, only to pull back sharply because the surface felt warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Each person remained silent out of fear of sounding irrational, but their eyes revealed the truth. They all felt that something shared the house with them. Dinner was called earlier than planned, as if gathering together would protect them more than dispersing through the house. But even as they sat at the table, no one could shake the feeling that the house no longer belonged to them. Something had moved in. Something had crossed a threshold none of them realized existed. The signs had been there all day, subtle but persistent, growing stronger as night approached. And when they finally heard footsteps above the ceiling, the sound did not mark the beginning of the horror. It marked the moment the house finally revealed what had been watching them since morning. In the hours that followed the terrifying moment at the dining table, the family tried to make sense of what they had witnessed, but every explanation collapsed the moment it formed. After the footsteps stopped above them, a profound silence spread through the house, thick enough to feel like a second presence lingering in the air. They waited, breath held, for the next sound, yet nothing came. It was as if the thing that walked across their ceiling had settled directly above their fear, listening through the floorboards. When the silence finally broke, it came from the hallway, where a faint scraping sound drifted downward, slow and steady, like fingernails dragging across wood. No one dared to stand up. The scraping moved from the far end of the hallway toward the staircase, growing louder with each inch before stopping abruptly at the top step. Someone whispered that maybe an animal had somehow gotten inside, but the idea dissolved when they remembered there were no vents large enough for anything substantial to enter, and no noise matched the weight they had heard above. One of the adults, driven by a shaky sense of responsibility, rose from the table and stepped toward the hallway with trembling feet. As they moved closer, they noticed something strange. The air grew warmer rather than colder, as if the space near the staircase radiated heat from an unseen source. When they reached the base of the stairs, the overhead light flickered violently, as though reacting to their presence. A sound resonated through the house, not from above, but from inside the walls. A low hum, pulsing at 3 slow intervals, vibrating through the wooden structure. The hum traveled downward, through the staircase frame, through the drywall, through the floor, as if something under the surface had awakened. They stepped back, heart pounding, unable to understand whether the sound came from something moving or something breathing. As afternoon arrived after a sleepless night, the family attempted to study the house in daylight, hoping the sun would bring clarity. But daylight only revealed more questions. Upstairs, the hallway floor was untouched. No dust disturbed, no footprints, no signs of an animal or intruder. Yet the air carried a faint smell, metallic and sharp, lingering along the walls. One of them touched the wall near the spot where the footsteps paused the night before, and the surface felt warm, as if the wood had absorbed heat from something living. Another family member noticed faint indentations in the ceiling of the dining room below, shallow but long, as if something with significant weight had crouched or pressed down from above. They measured the distance between the indentations with their eyes and realized they were spaced too widely to match human knees or hands. They resembled impressions left by limbs not shaped like anything familiar. Even more disturbing were the marks found near the upstairs closet, a series of thin scratches running vertically, each one almost identical in length. They were not deep enough to suggest force, but too straight and too clean to be accidental. The scratches formed a pattern, not random lines. 5 sets, evenly spaced, each one carved with precision that suggested intention rather than instinct. Experts who later reviewed the family's testimony pointed towards sleep deprivation or group hysteria. They said families under stress can share hallucinations, mirroring each other's fear. They suggested the warm wall could be the result of faulty wiring, the scratches a product of settling wood, the hum a resonance from distant industrial machinery. But none of the experts had answers for the indentation in the attic, the rhythmic footsteps, or the heat that seemed to travel through the structure as if alive. And none could explain why multiple households experienced similar phenomena during the same period of the year. The deeper the family looked, the more they realized something terrifying. Everything that happened in the house followed a pattern too consistent to dismiss, yet too unnatural to classify. It was as if something returned each year, drawn to the same type of home, the same kind of gathering, the same moment when warmth and vulnerability filled the air. And the worst question lingered beneath all others. If something had moved above them that night, why did it choose their house, their dinner, their moment of celebration?
In the days after that Thanksgiving night, the family discovered that the greatest damage came not from any physical presence in the house, but from the quiet way fear reshaped their minds, their routines, and their sense of safety. The event did not fade like an unfortunate experience that could be tucked into memory and covered by ordinary life. Instead, it lingered in the air like a scent that refused to disappear, sinking into conversations and thoughts, even when no one dared mention it aloud. Sleep became the first casualty. Each family member found themselves lying awake long past midnight, listening to a house that suddenly sounded different. Every shift in the wood, every whisper of the wind outside, every faint tick of the furnace became a reminder of footsteps that moved with inhuman patience above their heads. Parents avoided admitting it, but they woke multiple times through the night, reaching for lamps, scanning the ceiling, waiting for the hum to return. Children clung to blankets with wide eyes, afraid to close their eyes out of fear that something inside the walls might begin crawling again the moment darkness covered their vision. No one slept fully, and exhaustion wrapped itself around their voices and movements in a way that made the house feel even heavier. Daylight offered no relief. Instead of washing away the tension, it revealed how deeply the experience had infiltrated their lives. Someone refused to enter the upstairs hallway, claiming they felt watched the moment they stepped onto the first creaking board. Someone else avoided opening the closet where the scratches appeared, afraid the marks might have grown overnight. The adults stopped using the staircase except when necessary, moving through the house as if navigating a minefield of invisible pressure points. When visitors asked why they looked tired or distracted, the family offered vague excuses about holiday stress, but each person carried the silent terror that the house had chosen them specifically, that the presence would return because it had memorized their voices, their footsteps, their fear. The emotional weight seeped into small interactions. Conversations grew shorter, softer, strained. People snapped over minor issues. Others retreated into silence as if protecting themselves from revealing too much. The house felt less like a home and more like a barrier between them and the outside world, a shell they could not leave without carrying the memory on their skin. The atmosphere inside became tense and fragile, like a room filled with glass objects waiting to shatter. The kitchen, once the loudest, warmest place on holidays, became a room no one lingered in. The dining table stood untouched, the chairs left askew from the night they fled the room, and no one had the courage to straighten them. One morning, a family member admitted something quietly at the breakfast counter. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw the warm indentation in the attic insulation, as if the shape of something resting there had burned itself into the surface of their mind. Another revealed that they heard tapping during a shower, soft, slow taps against the bathroom wall, as though something traced their movements from the other side. Paranoia began to grow in places where logic tried to intervene. Someone thought the lights flickered in response to their voice. Someone else claimed the walls felt warmer when they walked past alone, but cold when others joined them. The youngest child refused to step near the staircase at all, saying the air smelt different there, like metal and dirt and something old. No adult wanted to acknowledge that they smelled it too on certain mornings. The sense of being observed became stronger with each passing day. Windows felt unsafe, especially at dusk, when the reflection of the room overlapped with the dark outline of the forest outside. More than once, someone thought they saw an unfamiliar shape in the glass, a tall form behind their reflection, but when they turned, the room remained empty. The psychological fear reached beyond the house. When family members returned to their own homes, they carried the anxiety with them, jumping at distant thuds, avoiding dark hallways, hesitating before stepping into quiet rooms. Friends noticed the change, asking whether something serious had happened. But the family could not explain the truth without sounding irrational. How could they describe the way a house listened? How could they put into words the sense that something intelligent had walked above their heads, leaving heat in the walls and marks on the wood? Fear does not always leave wounds that bleed. Sometimes it leaves shadows inside the mind, reshaping how a person interprets the world. As days turned into weeks, the trauma settled into them, not fading, but transforming. Some became hyper-aware of their surroundings, noticing details they once ignored. Others became withdrawn, unwilling to risk triggering memories of the footsteps. But all of them shared one heavy, unspoken truth. They felt changed. Not broken, but altered. They carried the sense that something had crossed into their lives, not as a fleeting event, but as a presence that left fingerprints on their thoughts. And beneath that truth lay another, far more unsettling. They all sensed that whatever walked in their house that night had not finished with them. It had paused, it had watched, and it had learned them by heart. When the family finally reached the point where fear outweighed denial, they contacted authorities, though none of them truly believed anyone could explain what had happened. The police arrived with calm professionalism, stepping into the house with clipboards and measured glances, unaware of the tension that hung in the air like a thin layer of dust waiting to be disturbed. They listened to the family's account with polite skepticism, nodding in all the right places, but their eyes betrayed uncertainty the moment they stepped into the dining room. Something about the atmosphere unsettled them, perhaps the faint metallic scent still clinging to the hallway, or the way the upstairs floor seemed too still when they examined it. They searched the attic carefully, shining flashlights into corners where insulation had been pressed down in that strange circular indentation. One officer crouched beside it, running his fingers along the compressed surface, expecting to find signs of an animal or structural flaw. Instead, the warmth beneath his hand startled him. Houses do not radiate heat from isolated spots, especially attics in cold months. When he touched the surface again, the warmth had already faded. He pulled his hand away quickly, not because of danger, but because he felt a quiet, creeping discomfort he could not rationalize. The report that followed offered little clarity. The official statement suggested possible wildlife intrusion, though the officers privately admitted they found no entry points, no chewed wiring, no droppings, no damage consistent with any known animal. A contractor brought in by the family mentioned unusual stress patterns on the beams above the dining room, as if weight had pressed downward in slow, deliberate increments rather than sudden force. He said the marks were too clean, too symmetrical, and he could not match them to any equipment he recognized. He recommended an engineer's evaluation, but admitted he had no explanation for the warmth in the walls or the vibrations the family described. Within the community, theories spread quietly.
Some neighbors leaned toward the idea of a trespasser, someone who might have been hiding in the house watching them from the attic. But that theory dissolved when they considered the timing, the heat, the scratches, and the fact that no intruder could move so silently or leave so few traces. Others suggested carbon monoxide poisoning, hallucinations born from environmental conditions. Yet the family had no headaches, no dizziness, and their detector showed no warnings. More unusual theories began circulating in whispers. Older residents recalled stories told decades earlier about what they called a Thanksgiving watcher, a presence that moved through the forest at the end of every harvest season. It did not harm anyone directly, but it observed families, drawn to homes filled with ritual, food, and warmth. Some said it was an old spirit tied to the land, something that remembered a time before houses existed. Others believed it was something far less poetic, an entity that mimicked human motion but did not understand human boundaries. A local historian mentioned strange records from the late 19th century, describing sightings of a tall, silent figure near farmland during autumn gatherings. The descriptions matched unsettling details: elongated limbs, movements too smooth to be natural, and the ability to leave heat in the places it stood. The historian said early settlers believed the figure existed between worlds, slipping into homes only when the atmosphere inside was charged with emotion, fear, joy, anger, celebration. The stronger the energy, the more likely it appeared. He suggested the family's Thanksgiving dinner may have generated the exact conditions needed: a moment of collective emotion, sound, heat, and tension, creating a gateway thin enough for something to cross.